Chapter 1. The Ghost of Winter. The wind was a blade, honed on the peaks of the distant Spineback Mountains, and it sliced through the Auroan Territory with a chilling, surgical precision. It was the winter of 1887, a season that would be remembered not for its snow, but for its teeth. The blizzard did not just fall, it screamed. It was a banshee's cry that clawed at the lonely clapboard buildings of solitude, a sound that promised to claim lives and break hearts. At the lonesome, wind-battered train station, a woman sat on a hard, splintery wooden bench. She was a ghost before her time, almost invisible against the swirling white chaos. Her name was Elara Vance, Ellie, and her breath formed fragile white clouds that were instantly devoured by the bitter air. She clutched a small, worn leather bag, the sum total of her existence pressed against her ribs. Inside there was $3, a photograph so faded it was more memory than image, and a heart full of dreams that had grown as cold and brittle as the night itself. What was about to unfold would become more than a tale. It would become a legend. A love story whispered in taverns and around campfires, from the sun-scorched banks of the Crimson River all the way to the northern rim. A story that would change 2 lives forever and carve its mark into the history of the unsettled frontier. The cold was no longer just a sensation, it was an invasion. It had seeped through her thin shawl hours ago, a useless scrap of wool against the fury of the storm. It had crept into her bones, making them ache with a deep, resonant thrum. Her fingers, tucked beneath her arms, had gone numb, the feeling draining away so slowly she hadn't noticed until they were alien things, unresponsive and pale. Her lips, she knew, were turning blue, a stark, morbid stain against the pallor of her skin. The last train east had chugged away 3 eternal hours ago, its mournful whistle a final fading note of hope. The next train, the station master had mumbled before shuddering himself away, wouldn't come until morning, and that was only if the storm relented, if the tracks didn't vanish completely beneath the suffocating white blanket. Ellie's mind drifted back, a defense against the encroaching frost. Back to Verdania. Back to the charity hospital with its scent of carbolic acid and suffering. She had been a nurse there, a good one. She knew the delicate art of tending wounds, the fierce, beautiful struggle of delivering babies, and the quiet, solemn grace of comforting the dying. But that life had been shattered by the scandal. She could still feel the phantom heat of Dr. Alistair Finch's breath on her neck, the brutal strength in his hands as he tried to force himself on her. And she could still feel the satisfying, solid crack of the iron bedpan against his nose as she fought back. But in the cold light of day, no one believed her word against his. A nurse, a woman, her denial was nothing against the reputation of a man. The hospital dismissed her without a second thought, and the word, troublemaker, hysteric, liar, spread through the medical community like wildfire. So she had run. With what little money she possessed, she'd bought a train ticket west, a desperate pilgrimage toward a horizon that promised a new start. The mining towns, she'd heard, were desperate for anyone with medical knowledge. But her money, like her hope, had dwindled with every mile. It ran out here, in solitude. And when she couldn't pay for another night, the boarding house had turned her out into the storm. Now she sat, watching her own life's essence fog in the air, wondering with a strange, detached calm if she would freeze to death before dawn. Beside her sat her small leather medical bag, her only true companion. It was the only thing of value she owned, its worn sides holding her surgical tools, her tinctures and medicines, and the precious few certificates that proved she was more than what they'd called her. A sound cut through the howl of the wind, the rhythmic crunch of horse hooves on frozen ground. Ellie looked up, her vision blurred by the swirling snow. A figure was approaching on horseback, a dark silhouette against the white maelstrom. He was large, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy, snow-dusted coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. As he drew closer, she saw the horse was a magnificent black stallion, its muscles rippling even in the cold. The man's clothes, though practical, were of a fine quality that spoke of wealth. He dismounted with a fluid grace, tying his horse to the hitching post. He walked toward the station, his boots, expensive, she noticed, even in her daze, making a solid, confident sound on the wooden platform. He moved with the easy stride of a man accustomed to being in charge, of having his way with the world. When he pushed through the station door, a great gust of wind and snow followed him inside, a wild announcement of his arrival. "Evenin', miss," he said. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture of ingrained politeness. His voice was deep and warm, a stark contrast to the frigid air, with the slight, pleasant drawl of someone who'd spent long years in the sun. "Mighty cold night to be sittin' out here alone." Ellie tried to speak, to form a reply, but her teeth were chattering too violently. The muscles in her jaw refused to obey. She managed only a small, convulsive nod. The man studied her, and his gaze was sharp, missing nothing. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. Despite the weather, he was clean-shaven and well-groomed. His face was weathered, etched with the fine lines of a life lived outdoors, but his eyes were kind, deeply, surprisingly kind. "Mine's Silas Blackwood," he said, pulling off his thick leather gloves. "Folks call me Si. I own the Twin Rivers Ranch, about 20 miles north of here. Been in town on business and was headin' home when I saw you through the window." His eyes fell to her medical bag, then took in the way she was dressed. Her clothes were of good quality, but worn thin, and she held herself with the posture of an educated woman, a stark contradiction to her obvious poverty. "Are you a doctor, miss?" he asked, his voice gentle. Nurse," Ellie managed to force the word through her chattering teeth. "Elara, Vance, from Verdania." Silas's eyes widened slightly. A trained nurse? In this god-forsaken stretch of earth, that was like finding a diamond in a dust storm. Most towns were lucky to have a barber who could pull teeth and set bones. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice now filled with an urgent concern, "you're going to freeze to death if you stay here much longer. The storm's getting worse, and this station isn't heated. Please, let me take you somewhere warm." Ellie looked at him, and a fragile hope wrestled with the weary cynicism she'd learned so painfully. She'd learned not to trust men, especially those with power or wealth. But she was desperate, and something about this Silas Blackwood seemed different from the men she'd known back east. There was a solid gentleness in his manner, a quiet strength that didn't need to boast. I don't have money for a hotel," she admitted, her voice so soft it was nearly lost in the wind's cry. "That's not your concern right now," Silas said firmly. "Getting you warm and fed is what matters. We can sort out the rest later." He shrugged out of his heavy coat, the movement fluid and decisive. He wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it, still carrying the heat of his body, made her gasp. The thick wool smelled of leather, horses, and something clean and comforting, perhaps pine soap. It was the smell of life. "Can you walk?" he asked. Ellie tried to stand, to summon what little strength she had left, but her legs were logs, stiff and unresponsive from the cold. They buckled beneath her. Without a moment's hesitation, Silas scooped her up into his arms, her medical bag included. He was immensely strong, yet he held her as if she were made of glass. She was light as a feather, he thought, and trembling like the last leaf on a winter tree. "The hotel's just across the street," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear as he carried her toward the door. "We'll get you warmed up and fed, and then you can tell me what brings a trained nurse to the Auroan Territory in the middle of winter." As they stepped out into the storm, Ellie found herself pressed against Silas's broad chest, his strong arms a secure fortress against the raging elements. For the first time in months, since the world had turned its back on her, she felt safe. She didn't know this man, she didn't know his intentions, but somehow, in the deepest part of her soul, she trusted him. Maybe it was the desperate situation, or maybe, just maybe, It was the kindness she had seen in his eyes, a kindness she hadn't encountered in far too long. Chapter 2. The Thawing of Hope. The Pioneers' Rest Hotel was the finest establishment in Solitude, a bastion of warmth and civility against the untamed wilderness. When Silas Blackwood, a man known throughout the territory, walked through the grand front door carrying a half-frozen, unconscious woman in his arms, every head in the lobby swiveled in their direction. A hush fell over the room, the low murmur of conversations ceasing abruptly. The desk clerk, a thin, perpetually anxious man named Jennings, scurried over, his face a mask of concern. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, what happened?" "Found this lady at the train station, near frozen to death," Silas said, his voice calm and steady as he held Ellie. "I need your best room, and send up hot food, coffee, and plenty of blankets. Also, get Dr. Alden, if he's still in town." "Right away, sir," Jennings said, fumbling for a key from the board behind him. "Room 12, second floor. Shall I help carry her?" "I've got her," Silas replied, already moving toward the grand staircase. Ellie was vaguely aware of the stairs, the scent of wood smoke and beeswax, and the sound of whispers that followed them like a trail of disturbed dust. But she was too cold, too utterly exhausted to care about her reputation or the stir she was causing. The warmth of the building was beginning to penetrate her frozen limbs, and with it came a deep, agonizing pain as feeling returned. Her fingers and toes tingled, then burned, as if being pierced by 1,000 tiny needles. Silas carried her into a spacious, beautifully appointed room. A large four-poster bed dominated one wall, and a fire was already crackling in the hearth. He set her down gently in a plush armchair by the fire, and immediately knelt to build up the flames from a brass bin. "The hotel will send up some ladies' clothes," he said, his focus entirely on the fire, a gesture of consideration that did not go unnoticed. "Yours are damp from the snow. We need to get you warm and dry." A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of a young bellboy with a tray. It held a silver pot of steaming coffee, a bowl of thick soup, and a stack of clean woolen blankets. Silas tipped the boy generously and sent him on his way. Then, with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size, he poured Ellie a cup of coffee, adding a careful amount of cream and sugar. "Drink this slowly," he said, wrapping one of the thick blankets around her shoulders. "Too much heat too fast can be dangerous." Ellie sipped the coffee gratefully. The liquid was a trail of fire, spreading warmth through her chest and chasing away the deep internal chill. "You seem to know something about medicine yourself," she observed, her voice growing stronger, less like the rustle of dry leaves. Silas smiled, a genuine smile that reached his kind eyes. "You learn a few things running a ranch. Men get hurt, animals get sick, and the nearest doctor might be 100 miles away." He pulled up another chair and sat across from her, creating a small, intimate circle in the firelight. "But I'm no trained nurse. What brought you west, Miss Vance, if you don't mind my asking?" Ellie studied his face, the way the firelight played across its rugged plains. He had honest eyes, she decided, and after what he had done for her tonight, he deserved some explanation. "I worked in a hospital in Verdania," she said, choosing her words carefully. "There was trouble, a doctor who wouldn't take no for an answer." She paused, the memory still sharp and ugly. "When I defended myself, I was dismissed. No hospital back east would hire me after that." Silas's jaw tightened, and she saw a flicker of raw anger in his eyes. "A man forced himself on you?" "He tried to," Ellie clarified, meeting his gaze directly. "I broke his nose with a bedpan." Despite the grim nature of the conversation, Silas's mouth twitched with the hint of a smile. It was a look of pure, unadulterated approval. "Good for you," he said, his voice low and firm. "I hope it hurt." "It did," Ellie said, and for the first time in months, she almost smiled too, a real, genuine smile. "But it cost me my career. I thought, maybe in the West, where doctors are scarce, my past wouldn't matter so much." "It doesn't," Silas said with conviction. "Out here, we judge people by what they do, not by the lies told about them back east. A trained nurse is worth her weight in gold in this territory." Another knock interrupted them. A hotel maid entered, her arms laden with women's clothing. "Begging your pardon, sir, but these are the finest we have. Mrs. Gable in room 8 donated them. She said, 'Any woman caught in this storm deserves all the help we can give.'" "Thank Mrs. Gable for her kindness," Silas said, standing. "I'll wait downstairs while Miss Vance changes." "Mr. Blackwood," Ellie called out as he reached the door. Her voice was stronger now, steadier. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." Silas paused, his hand on the heavy brass doorknob. He turned back slowly. He said quietly, his gaze introspective, "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone in the world," he said. "And maybe because I've been praying for someone like you to come along." Ellie frowned, confused. "Someone like me?" "A healer," he said, his voice soft but intense. "My ranch hands get hurt regular, and I've lost good men because there was no one to tend them properly." He took a step back into the room, turning to face her fully. "But more than that," he confessed, "I've been looking for someone special, someone with strength and courage, someone who'd break a man's nose rather than let him take what isn't his to take." With that, he left the room, closing the door gently behind him. Ellie sat by the fire, staring at the closed door, her mind reeling. She'd expected many things when she came west: hardship, loneliness, danger. But she had never, in her wildest imaginings, expected to meet a man like Silas Blackwood. Rich enough to own his own ranch, kind enough to rescue a complete stranger, and respectful enough to leave her alone to change her clothes without being asked. She looked at the clothes the maid had brought, a simple but well-made dress of deep blue wool, clean undergarments, thick stockings, and even a pair of Sterv's boots that looked like they might fit. As she slowly, painfully changed out of her damp, travel-stained clothes, she couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. For the first time since leaving Verdania, a tiny, fragile spark of hope began to glow in the cold, empty chambers of her heart. Chapter 3. The Promise of the Twin Rivers. Ellie woke to the unfamiliar sensation of sunlight streaming through a clean glass window, painting a bright rectangle on the plush carpet. Outside, the distant sound of voices and the rumble of a wagon drifted up from the street below. The storm had passed, leaving the world transformed, covered in a pristine, blindingly white blanket of snow. She had slept more deeply than she had in weeks, warm and safe for the first time since leaving Verdania. A soft, polite knock at the door made her sit up, her heart giving a little flutter. "Miss Vance, it's Silas Blackwood." "Just a moment," she called, her voice still thick with sleep. She quickly braided her long brown hair and smoothed the borrowed blue dress. When she opened the door, she found Silas standing in the hallway holding a breakfast tray laden with covered dishes. "Morning," he said, and his smile was so warm it seemed to make the whole hallway brighter. It was a smile that made her heart perform a curious little skip. "Much better, thank you," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't know how I can ever repay your kindness." "Silas," he corrected gently, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "And you don't owe me anything, though I was hoping we might talk about your plans." They sat across from each other as Ellie ate the hearty breakfast of eggs, thick-cut bacon, fluffy biscuits, and sweet berry jam. The food was delicious, and she realized with a pang just how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal. "I don't have many plans," she admitted between bites, the confession tasting like ash in her mouth. "I was hoping to find work in one of the mining camps, but I'm not sure how to get there, or even which camps might need a nurse." Silas leaned back in his chair, studying her with a thoughtful expression. "Mining camps are rough places for a woman alone, dangerous too. Most of those men haven't seen a decent woman in months, and they don't always remember their manners." "I can take care of myself," Ellie said, a flicker of her old fire returning. Her voice was quiet but laced with determination. "I'm sure you can," Silas agreed, a look of respect in his eyes. "But there might be another option. My ranch, the Twin Rivers, covers about 50,000 acres. I employ about 60 men year-round. During roundup and branding season, that number goes up to nearly 100. These men work hard, and they get hurt. Regular. Broken bones, cuts, burns, snake bites, you name it. Ellie set down her coffee cup, her full attention captured. He was leading somewhere. You're offering me work? I'm offering you a position, Silas clarified, his tone serious and professional. As the ranch's nurse, good pay, comfortable quarters, and all the medical supplies you need. You'd have your own cabin near the main house, and Jed, that's our cook, would make sure you're well fed. It sounded like a dream, a fantasy spun from her deepest desperation. It was almost too good to be true. There had to be a catch. What would you expect in return? Silas's expression grew even more serious. Honest work for honest pay. Tend the men when they're hurt, help with difficult births among the livestock when needed, and maybe teach some of the hands basic first aid. Nothing more than that. He paused, his gaze direct. And you'd expect nothing personal? Understanding dawned in Silas's eyes, and he seemed to appreciate her caution. Miss Vance, Ellie, I am not the kind of man who would take advantage of a woman's desperate situation. If something personal were to develop between us, it would be because we both wanted it, not because you felt obligated by gratitude. Ellie studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, any flicker of falsehood. But his eyes were clear and honest, and everything about his behavior since finding her had been that of a true gentleman. How far is your ranch? She asked. 20 miles north. It's called the Twin Rivers, after my initials, Silas Blackwood. We raise cattle and horses, some of the finest in the Auroan Territory. The work is hard, but it's honest, and the men who ride for me are good people. He leaned forward slightly. You said you've been looking for a place where your past wouldn't matter. This is it. A question formed in her mind. Haven't you tried to hire a doctor? Silas laughed, a short, humorless sound. I've tried. Posted notices in newspapers from Pinnacle City to Midlands. Most doctors want to practice in towns, where they can build a profitable practice treating wealthy patients. Ranch work is too uncertain, too dangerous, and not profitable enough for most of them. But you'd hire a woman? I'd hire anyone with the skills and the courage to do the job, Silas said firmly. Out here, we care more about what a person can do than whether they wear pants or a dress. Ellie considered the offer. It was an anchor in a raging sea, better than anything she had dared to hope for. But it still felt too perfect. What aren't you telling me? She asked, her gaze steady. Silas smiled, a slow, appreciative grin. Smart as well as skilled. All right, here's the truth of it. The Twin Rivers is a working ranch, not a fancy estate. The winters are hard, the summers are hot, and we're 20 miles from the nearest town. You'd be the only woman on the ranch most of the time, except for Jed's wife Sarah, who helps in the kitchen. It can be lonely. I've been lonely in cities full of people, Ellie said quietly. At least ranch loneliness would be honest. There's something else, Silas continued, his tone sober again. I'm not just the owner of the Twin Rivers. My family has money, quite a bit of it. My father made a fortune in shipping before the war, and I've done well with investments, in addition to the ranch. Some people, they might say you're trying to catch yourself a wealthy husband. Ellie's chin came up, a defiant spark in her eyes. Let them say what they want. I know my own heart and my own intentions. I believe you do, Silas said softly, but I wanted you to know what you might be walking into. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the distant noises from the street below. Finally, Ellie spoke, her voice clear and decisive. When would you want me to start? Silas's face lit up with a smile that transformed his weathered features, making him look younger, almost boyish. Does that mean you'll take the position? It means I'll try it, Ellie said carefully. If it doesn't work out, for either of us, I'll move on, with no hard feelings. Fair enough, Silas said, standing and extending his hand. Welcome to the Twin Rivers, Nurse Vance. As Ellie shook his hand, she felt a palpable spark, a jolt of electricity that traveled up her arm. From the look in Silas's eyes, he felt it too. This job, she thought, might be far more complicated than she'd imagined. But for the first time in months, she was truly, deeply looking forward to the future. Chapter 4: A Healer's Home. The ride to the Twin Rivers Ranch took 3 hours, a journey through a world sculpted from snow and silence. The landscape took Ellie's breath away. Silas had insisted on outfitting her properly in solitude, buying her a warm sheepskin-lined coat, sturdy riding boots, and other necessities. He'd waved away her protests about the expense. "Consider it an advance on your salary," he'd said, with that grin that was becoming both familiar and dangerously charming. Now, as they rode side by side through the vast Auroan wilderness, Ellie felt a sense of freedom she'd never known back east. The world there had been a place of crowded streets and rigid expectations. This was different. The sky was an endless, aching blue, the snow-capped Spineback Mountains in the distance like silent, sleeping giants. The air was so clean and cold, it felt like drinking from a mountain spring. Silas pointed out landmarks along the way, his voice a warm contrast to the crisp air. A frozen creek where they watered their horses, its banks lined with skeletal cottonwood trees. A high ridge that provided shelter during summer roundups. And finally, the boundary markers of the Twin Rivers. "There she is," Silas said, his voice filled with a quiet, profound pride as they crested a small hill. Ellie gasped. Below them, nestled in a wide, protected valley, the Twin Rivers Ranch sprawled like a small, self-contained town. The main house was a large, formidable structure of logs and stone, with a wide front porch and smoke curling lazily from 2 chimneys. Nearby stood a long bunkhouse, sprawling stables, a corral, a blacksmith shop with its rhythmic clang echoing faintly, and various other outbuildings. Even in the cold, it was a hive of activity. Men were working, their movements purposeful and unhurried. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice full of genuine awe. "Wait until spring," Silas replied, a smile in his voice. "When the grass is green and the wildflowers are blooming, there's no prettier sight in all of the territory." As they rode into the ranch yard, men began to emerge from the various buildings, their curiosity piqued. Word of Silas's return from town, and the woman riding beside him, had obviously spread like a prairie fire. "Boys," Silas called out as he dismounted, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "I want you to meet Miss Elara Vance. She's our new nurse." A ragged but heartfelt cheer went up from the assembled men. Ellie felt her cheeks flush with color. One grizzled cowboy with kind eyes and gray whiskers stepped forward, removing his hat. "Name's Caleb Hatcher, miss. I'm the foreman here. Can't tell you how glad we are to have someone with Mivipal training on the ranch." "Thank you, Mr. Hatcher," Ellie said, her voice steady as Silas helped her down from her horse. "Oh, you will be," said another man, holding up a bandaged hand. "I cut myself on some barbed wire yesterday, and it's been paining me something fierce." "I'll take a look at it after I get settled," Ellie promised, a sense of purpose settling over her like a warm cloak. Silas led her towards a small but solidly built cabin, set about 50 yards from the main house, offering a measure of privacy. "This will be your home," he said, opening the door. The cabin was simple but perfect. The main room served as both a living area and an office, with a sturdy desk and shelves. There was a small, cozy bedroom and a kitchen with a wood stove. A fire had already been lit in the stone fireplace, and the rooms were warm and welcoming. "Jed's wife, Sarah, stocked the kitchen with supplies," Silas explained, "and I had some of the boys bring over furniture and linens. If you need anything else, you just let me know." Ellie walked around the cabin, her fingers tracing the smooth grain of the simple wooden furniture. She looked out the windows. One faced the majestic mountains, their peaks turning pink in the late afternoon sun. The other looked out over the main house and the bustling ranch yard. It was more than a cabin. It was a sanctuary. "There's one more thing," Silas said, a note of anticipation in his voice. He led her to a door she hadn't noticed. "I thought you might need this." He opened the door, and Ellie's breath caught in her throat. It was a fully equipped medical office. There was a proper examination table, tall cabinets filled with glass-stoppered bottles of supplies, gleaming surgical instruments laid out on clean linen, and stacks of bandages and medicines. It was better equipped than some of the hospital wards she'd worked in back east. "Silas," she breathed, turning to him, her eyes wide with disbelief. She was completely overwhelmed. This, this must have cost a fortune. "A good nurse is worth a fortune," he said simply, his gaze steady. "Besides, I ordered most of this months ago. I was just hoping I'd eventually find someone to use it." Ellie felt the sting of tears prick her eyes. After months of rejection, poverty, and soul-crushing hardship, this quiet, profound kindness was almost too much to bear. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "Don't thank me yet," Silas said, a wry smile touching his lips. "Wait until you've seen what some of these cowboys can do to themselves. You'll earn every penny of your salary." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Caleb Hatcher entered, supporting a young cowboy who was hopping on one foot, his face pale and twisted in pain. "Sorry to bother you, miss, but Jesse here just got his foot stepped on by his horse." "Bring him into the medical room," Ellie said, her voice immediately shifting into the calm, professional tone of a nurse. Her personal emotions were set aside. This was what she was here for. "Let's get that boot off and see what we're dealing with." As she worked, carefully examining Jesse's injured foot, badly bruised but not broken, thankfully, Ellie was aware of Silas watching from the doorway. He didn't interfere, just observed, his arms crossed over his chest. When she looked up after bandaging the foot and giving Jesse firm instructions for care, she found him smiling. A quiet, satisfied smile. "What?" she asked, a hint of a challenge in her voice. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head slightly. "Just thinking that this might work out even better than I'd hoped." That evening, after treating 3 more minor injuries and meeting most of the ranch hands, Ellie sat in her new cabin, the fire crackling a cheerful song. She tried to process the whirlwind of the last 48 hours. 2 days ago, she'd been freezing and penniless at a train station, her life hanging by a thread. Now, she had a respectable job, a beautiful home, and the immediate respect of the men she'd be working with. And then there was Silas Blackwood himself. He was a paradox, unlike any man she'd ever known. He was not one of the refined but weak gentlemen of Verdania society, nor was he one of the crude, opportunistic men who'd tried to take advantage of her vulnerability. Silas was strong but gentle, wealthy but unpretentious. He treated her as an equal, a professional colleague, while still being fiercely protective. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Silas standing on her small porch, holding 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might like some hot chocolate before bed," he said. "Sarah makes the best in the Auroan Territory." "That's very thoughtful," Ellie said. Would you like to come in for a few minutes?" Silas hesitated for a moment. "I don't want to compromise your reputation." "I think my reputation can survive a brief conversation with my employer," Ellie said with a small smile. "Besides, who's going to see us way out here?" He entered and took a seat by the fireplace, while Ellie settled into the chair across from him. The hot chocolate was indeed delicious, rich and warming to her soul. Their conversations began that night, slow, careful explorations of each other's worlds. They discovered a shared intelligence, a similar dry wit, and a mutual loneliness that they had both carried for a long time. Their talks became a nightly ritual, a quiet space where the lines between employer and employee began to blur into something softer, something more like friendship. One evening, about a week after she arrived, he made a confession. "I want to be honest with you about something," he began, staring into the fire. "When I found you at that train station, it wasn't entirely by chance." Ellie set down her cup, suddenly wary. "What do you mean?" "I'd been in town on business, yes," he admitted, "but I was also making inquiries about finding a nurse or a doctor for the ranch. The hotel clerk mentioned that a woman with medical training had been asking about work earlier that day. I went to the station hoping to find you." "So you knew who I was?"
I knew a trained nurse was supposed to be on the evening train from the east, Silas said, meeting her eyes. I didn't know your name or your circumstances until I found you there. I didn't tell you earlier because I wanted you to take the job based on its merits, not because you felt obligated to the man who rescued you. It made sense, and Ellie found herself respecting him even more for his honesty. Is there anything else I should know? She asked, her voice soft. Silas met her eyes directly, his gaze intense. Just this. I'm attracted to you, Ellie. I have been since the moment I saw you sitting in that station, looking like the whole world had turned against you. But I want you to know my word is my bond. Your job here is secure, regardless of your personal feelings towards me. I will not pressure you or make your position here dependent on anything other than your professional skills. Ellie felt her heart skip a beat. The attraction was powerful and mutual, a silent current that had been flowing between them since that first night. But she appreciated his straightforwardness, his honor. Thank you for being honest, she said softly. And for the record, the attraction isn't one-sided. They looked at each other across the firelight, both acutely aware that something significant, something powerful and irreversible was beginning between them. But they also both knew it was too soon, too new, too complicated by their unique situation. For now, the unspoken promise was enough. Chapter 5. Trial by Lightning. Spring came early to the Auroan Territory that year, a gentle, welcome surrender after the brutality of winter. The snow receded, revealing the rich, dark earth, and a faint green haze began to spread across the rolling hills. With the changing of the season, Ellie settled into her new life at the Twin Rivers Ranch. She became an indispensable part of its rhythm, her days filled with the steady, satisfying work of a healer. She treated everything from broken bones to blistering sunburns, from snake bites to the croup that afflicted a cowboy's young son. She delivered foals and calves with the same steady hands she used to stitch wounds, earning the awe and respect of the hardened ranch hands. They came to trust her implicitly, often seeking her advice on matters of the heart and soul as matters of the body. But it was her growing relationship with Silas that occupied most of her thoughts. He was meticulously careful to maintain professional boundaries during the day, treating her with a formal respect in front of the men. But their evening conversations on her cabin porch became a cherished, sacred routine. They were building something, one conversation at a time. Their talks were a slow, careful architecture, building a bridge of trust between two solitary worlds. They talked about everything: his dreams for the ranch, her memories of Verdania, their shared hopes for a future that was beginning to seem brighter and more possible. One evening in late April, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery strokes of gold and purple, Silas brought up a subject that had clearly been weighing on his mind. "Ellie, there's something I need to tell you about my past," he said, his voice unusually serious. She set down her coffee cup and gave him her full, undivided attention. "What is it?" "I was married before," Silas said quietly, his eyes on the distant horizon. "Her name was Clara. We were childhood sweethearts back in the Sunstone Territories. We married when I was 22.
Ellie felt a sharp, unexpected stab of jealousy, followed immediately by a wave of guilt. Of course a man like Silas, a man of his age and standing, would have been married before. "What happened to her?" she asked gently. "Fever took her 3 years ago," Silas said, the pain still evident in his voice, a raw edge that time had not fully smoothed. "We'd been trying to have children, but it never happened. When she died, I thought my chance at happiness, at a family, had died with her." "I'm so sorry, Si," Ellie said, her heart aching for him. She reached over and squeezed his hand, a simple gesture of comfort. "She must have been very special." "She was," Silas agreed, turning to look at her, his gaze intense. "But she was also nothing like you. Clara was gentle and delicate. She was content to stay home and tend her flowers. You're strong, independent. You're willing to face challenges head on. I love that about you, Ellie." Her heart stopped. He loved her. "I know it's too soon," he said quickly, as if sensing her shock. "I know we work together, and that complicates things. But I can't pretend anymore. My feelings for you aren't just professional respect. Mine aren't either, Ellie admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But you're right, it is complicated. What would the men think? What would people in town say? I don't care what they say, Silas said firmly, but I care what you think, what you want. Before Ellie could find the words to answer, their private world was shattered. Caleb Hatcher came running up to the cabin, his face pale and etched with worry in the fading light. "Boss, Miss Ellie, there's been an accident. A freak lightning strike spooked a herd of horses, and young Leo got trampled. He's hurt bad." Ellie was on her feet in an instant, her personal feelings pushed aside, her mind snapping into the sharp focus of a medical professional. "Where is he?" "The bunkhouse," Caleb replied, breathless. "Jed and some of the boys carried him there." Ellie ran to her medical room, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she grabbed her surgical bag and essential supplies. Silas was already saddling a fresh horse to ride for the doctor in Solitude, a desperate, long-shot hope. But when Ellie reached the crowded, lamp-lit bunkhouse and saw Leo's injuries, she knew with a sickening certainty that there wasn't time. The 18-year-old cowboy was unconscious, his face a ghastly shade of gray. His chest was crushed, and his breathing was a shallow, ragged rasp. The signs of massive internal bleeding were unmistakable. She knew she had to operate immediately, right here, or they would lose him. "Clear a table," she ordered, her voice cutting through the men's panicked murmurs with an authority that commanded instant obedience. "I need lots of light, hot water, and clean sheets. Caleb, I need you to assist me." "Miss Ellie," Caleb said, his face a mask of uncertainty, "shouldn't we wait for the doc?" "He'll be dead before the doctor gets here," Ellie said, her voice firm, leaving no room for debate. "I've done this surgery before. We can save him, but we have to act now." For the next 3 hours, under the intense, flickering light of a dozen oil lamps held by trembling hands, Ellie worked over Leo's broken body. The bunkhouse, usually a place of rough laughter and noise, was held in a profound, prayerful silence. The cowboys watched in awed stillness as she performed what seemed like miracles, her skilled hands moving with a speed and confidence that defied belief. She repaired internal damage, set shattered bones, and stemmed the bleeding that was stealing the boy's life. When she finally stepped back, every muscle in her body screaming with exhaustion, her face pale but triumphant, Leo's breathing was steady and even. A faint touch of color had returned to his cheeks. "He'll live," she announced to the silent room. The bunkhouse erupted in a deafening cheer. Men were clapping each other on the back, wiping tears from their eyes. Silas, who had returned with the doctor from Solitude an hour earlier, had been watching from the doorway, his face a mask of undisguised admiration. When the old doctor examined Leo and pronounced Ellie's work as fine as any surgeon in Pinnacle City could have done, Silas's pride was a palpable thing, evident to everyone present. Later that night, long after Leo had been moved to the cabin next to Ellie's for easier monitoring, she and Silas finally had a chance to talk. They sat on her porch in the cool, silver light of the moon. "What you did tonight," Silas began, his voice thick with emotion. "It was incredible. You saved that boy's life." "It's what any trained nurse would have done," Ellie said modestly, though she was still trembling from the adrenaline and exhaustion. "No," Silas said, his voice firm, as he took her hands in his. "It's what you did, and it's why I love you." There it was again, out in the open, undeniable and true. Ellie looked at this incredible man who had rescued her from freezing, given her a home and a purpose, and who now looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. All the complications, all the fears, melted away in the face of that look. "I love you too, Si," she whispered, her voice strong and sure. He leaned over and kissed her then. It was not a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss full of gratitude, admiration, and a deep, abiding love. It was a kiss of homecoming, under the star-filled Auroran sky. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me, Ellie," Silas said, his voice urgent.
I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But I can't imagine my life without you now." "Silas," Ellie began, her mind reeling. But he held up a hand. "You don't have to answer tonight," he said, his voice softening. Just promise me you'll think about it." "I will," she promised, though in her heart, in the deepest, truest part of her, she already knew the answer. Chapter 6. A Union Forged in the Frontier. Word of Silas Blackwood's proposal spread through the Twin Rivers Ranch faster than a wildfire on a dry plain. To Ellie's surprise and immense relief, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The cowboys, who had come to see her not just as a nurse, but the heart of the ranch, were thrilled. They could all see how happy she made their boss, a man they respected and admired. Even Caleb Hatcher, the grizzled foreman, who had initially been skeptical about having a woman on the ranch, gave the match his wholehearted approval. "Never seen the boss smile so much," he told Ellie one morning as she was checking on Leo's steady recovery. "You're good for him, miss. Good for all of us." The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in June, and it quickly became the social event of the season in that part of the Auroan Territory. It seemed everyone wanted to witness the union of the millionaire rancher and the nurse who had saved him, in her own way, just as he had saved her. Ellie wore a dress of ivory silk that Silas had ordered specially for her from a seamstress in Port Meridian. It was simple yet elegant, and Sarah, Jed's wife, had lovingly woven tiny, vibrant flowers from the prairie into her braided hair. She looked radiant, her happiness a light that seemed to emanate from within. As she walked down the makeshift aisle between the assembled ranch buildings, it was Caleb Hatcher who proudly escorted her, his face beaming, a surrogate for the father she had lost so many years ago. Silas waited at the altar they had constructed on the wide front porch of the main house. He was dressed in his finest black suit, looking more handsome than Ellie had ever seen him, but also more nervous. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back. When their eyes met, however, all his nervousness seemed to dissolve, replaced by a smile of pure, unadulterated joy that took her breath away. The ceremony was performed by the circuit preacher, a kindly man with a weathered face and a booming voice. His words about love, commitment, and partnership seemed especially meaningful, given the unlikely and dramatic way Silas and Ellie had found each other. "Do you, Silas Thorne Blackwood, take Elara Jane Vance to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Silas said, his voice firm and clear. "And, do you, Elara Jane Vance, take Silas Thorne Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Ellie replied, her voice strong and sure, filled with all the love in her heart.
When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Silas's kiss was passionate and possessive, drawing a chorus of cheers, whistles, and good-natured catcalls from the cowboys. Ellie blushed, but she didn't pull away. She felt secure, anchored, and utterly cherished in the circle of his arms. The celebration that followed was legendary. Jed had outdone himself, preparing a feast that included whole roasted beef, fresh-caught trout, vegetables from Sarah's garden, and a magnificent 3-tiered wedding cake that had been carefully transported all the way from Pinnacle City. There was music from a fiddle and a guitar, and the dancing and storytelling went on well into the star-dusted night. But perhaps the most meaningful moment of the evening came when Leo, still recovering from his injuries but determined to attend the wedding, slowly stood to make a toast. He raised his glass of lemonade, as he was still too weak for anything stronger. "To Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice filled with sincere emotion, "the woman who saved my life and who made our boss the happiest man in the Auroan Territory. May your love story inspire generations to come." The crowd erupted in heartfelt agreement, and Ellie found herself crying happy tears as Silas squeezed her hand tightly. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Silas and Ellie found themselves alone on the porch of the main house, which would now be their home together.
The air was cool and smelled of pine and prairie dust. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood," Silas said, taking both of her hands in his, "how does it feel to be a married woman?" "It feels like coming home," Ellie replied honestly. "It feels like everything that happened before, all the pain and the struggle, was just preparing me for this moment." Silas pulled her close, and they danced slowly on the porch, to the faint music still drifting from the bunkhouse, where some of the cowboys were still celebrating. "I have something for you," Silas said, his voice a low murmur against her hair. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, dark velvet box. He opened it to reveal a beautiful gold locket gleaming in the moonlight. "Silas, it's beautiful," Ellie breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "Open it," he urged. Inside, there was a tiny, perfect photograph of the two of them, taken by a traveling photographer earlier that day. Engraved on the opposite side were 4 simple words: "Forever and always. S.B." "Now you'll always have me close to your heart," Silas said softly. "I already do," Ellie whispered, and she kissed him under the vast, star-filled Auroan sky, a sky that seemed to promise them a future as boundless as itself. Epilogue: A love that made history. The first years of their marriage were a whirlwind of joy and challenge, a testament to the strength of their partnership. Ellie continued her work as the ranch nurse, her skills becoming legendary throughout the territory. She successfully treated a cholera outbreak in the nearby town of Argent Creek, delivered twins during a blizzard that had cut them off from the world, and even removed a bullet from a wounded marshal who'd been chasing rustlers. But now she was also Mrs. Blackwood, the mistress of the Twin Rivers. She proved to be a natural at that role as well, helping Silas with the business side of the operation. She had a keen mind for numbers and strategy, and Silas valued her opinions above all others, never making an important decision without first consulting her. Their love story became the talk of the territory. Newspaper reporters came from as far away as Sterling City to write about the millionaire rancher and his nurse wife. The tale of how Silas had found Ellie, freezing and alone at the train station, was retold around campfires and in saloons from the Crimson River to the Northern Rim. It was a story of hope, of second chances, of the transformative power of kindness. Their happiness was tested in the spring of 1889, when Ellie's past came back to haunt them. Dr. Alastair Finch, the man who had assaulted her in Verdania, arrived in Solitude. Vengeful and bitter, he claimed to be investigating medical malpractice by unlicensed practitioners, his true target being Ellie. "He's come to cause trouble," Ellie told Silas, her hands trembling as she read the telegram that had warned them of his arrival. "He's never forgiven me." "Let him come," Silas said, his voice grim, his eyes like chips of flint. "He'll find that things are different out here." Finch arrived at the ranch 3 days later, accompanied by a territorial marshal carrying official-looking papers. He was a thin, pale man with cold, calculating eyes and a permanent sneer that made Ellie's skin crawl. He tried to intimidate her, to shame her, to question her virtue in front of her husband and the marshal. That was as far as he got before Silas's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The marshal reached for his gun, but found himself facing 30 angry, silent cowboys who had appeared as if from nowhere, their loyalty to Ellie and Silas absolute. A proper hearing was held in Solitude's courthouse. It seemed half the territory showed up to support Ellie. Patient after patient testified about her skill, her compassion, her courage. The doctor from Solitude spoke eloquently about her surgical abilities. Even the territorial governor sent a letter praising her contributions. Finch's accusations, built on lies and spite, fell apart. It was revealed that he himself had been dismissed from his last position for drinking and incompetence. When Caleb Hatcher took the stand and told the story of how Ellie had saved Leo's life, performing a surgery no one else in the territory could have, the judge's decision was swift. "Mrs. Blackwood," the judge declared, his voice booming through the packed courtroom, Your service to this territory has been exemplary. Your nursing certificate is hereby officially recognized by the territorial government. As for you, Dr. Finch, I suggest you leave our territory immediately before these good people decide to show you the same hospitality you've shown their beloved nurse." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Ellie found herself swept up in Silas's strong arms as he spun her around in celebration. "It's over," he whispered in her ear. "He can't hurt you anymore." "We did it," Ellie replied, looking into his eyes. "Together, we can face anything together." By 1892, Silas and Ellie Blackwood were one of the most influential couples in the Auroan Territory. The Twin Rivers had expanded, and Ellie had established the first real hospital in the territory. Silas had become a force in the legislature, advocating for statehood. But their greatest joy came from the 3 children they had been blessed with. Twin boys, Elias and Silas Jr., followed by a daughter, Annalise, named in honor of Silas's first wife, Clara, with Ellie's gracious blessing. Years later, when historians wrote about the early days of the state, they always included the story of Silas and Ellie Blackwood. Their love story became a legend. The Twin Rivers Ranch thrived under their children's leadership. Elias became a respected cattleman and a state senator. Silas Jr. became a doctor, following in his mother's footsteps. And Annalise married a fellow rancher, raising 6 children of her own, passing down the family stories of courage, love, and perseverance. In the museum in Solitude, visitors can still see Ellie's small leather medical bag, the one she carried that cold night in 1887. Next to it is Silas's wedding ring and a copy of their marriage certificate. But the real monument to their love isn't in any museum. It's in the hundreds of couples who found inspiration in their story, who took chances on love, who built lives together in the unsettled frontier. Silas died peacefully in 1923 at the ripe old age of 86. Ellie followed him just 3 months later, unable, they said, to bear life without her beloved husband. They are buried together on the hill overlooking the Twin Rivers Ranch, 2 headstones standing side by side under the big Auroan sky. The inscription on their shared headstone, chosen by their children, reads simply, "Forever and always, a love that made history." Even today, more than a century later, the legend of Silas and Ellie Blackwood lives on, a testament to the power of love, the promise of the frontier dream, and the profound truth that the greatest adventures, the stories that shape our world, often begin with a single, simple act of kindness.